Bienvenidos! Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast, the show for Spanish learners that love music, travel, and culture. Close your grammar textbooks, shut down the language apps, and open your ears to how Spanish is spoken in the real world. Let us show you how to go from beginner to bilingual. Here is your host, certified language coach, Tamara Marie.
Hola, bienvenidos al episodio 147. Welcome to episode 147 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Now, this week, we are going to be talking about a super important topic. Now, if you've been learning Spanish for a while or if you're just getting started, it's really important to know how to answer some simple questions in Spanish. And in this episode, I'm going to cover 5 questions that you absolutely must be able to respond to in Spanish if you are going to become conversationally fluent in the language. Now, I know a lot of times we start learning vocabulary or we might get obsessed with grammar, and in doing so, our conversational skills may be neglected. And it isn't until you actually are confronted with someone in front of you asking you questions in a conversation that you realize that you have no idea how to respond. So I've got you covered in this episode. We're going to go through some things that maybe you already know if you're more advanced, but if you're just starting out or if you haven't been in the habit of having a lot of conversations in Spanish lately, then this might be something that you need to brush up on as you begin to have more and more conversations. So I'm going to assume you already know the basics of Hola, ¿cómo estás? Estoy bien, gracias. ¿Y tú? ¿Y usted? I'm going to assume you know that. You know how to say, me llamo Tamara. Mi nombre es Tamara. And if you don't know and this sounds complicated to you, please download our beginner's guide to Spanish conversations. You can just go to SpanishConversationGuide.com. Really easy, SpanishConversationGuide.com if you need to start from ground zero with all the basics. But I'm going to assume that you at least know how to say those few things. And we're going to talk about some ways that you might start a conversation and some questions that might come up in the course of your conversations that you should be able to answer with some fluidity. Now, even if you hear some of these questions and you know how to answer them, I want to challenge you, especially if you're more of an intermediate Spanish speaker or even an advanced beginner, I want to challenge you to think about how you commonly respond to these questions and see if you can make your answers a little bit more detailed, more robust, and more fluid. So keep that in mind as we go through. Remember, our goal is that we want you to sound as natural speaking Spanish as you do your native language, which I'm presuming if you're listening to this podcast is probably English, or you're pretty advanced or fluent in English at the very least. So we want to be able to have our conversational expression in Spanish flow. And the way to do that is to really get good at answering some of these questions, practicing them, and getting better and better at giving more fluent answers to these questions. So even if you know how to answer some of these, I want you to reflect on how you've answered in the past, and if there's any way that you can add a little bit more detail or challenge yourself to make those answers a little bit more close to what you might say in a conversation with an English speaker. All right? So with that in mind, let's get to the 5 things that you should definitely know how to say in Spanish when responding to questions. And the first one is pretty common, and I know you probably already know how to answer this one, and it is ¿de dónde eres? ¿De dónde eres? And that's the informal way of saying where are you from. In the formal setting, you would say ¿de dónde es usted? ¿De dónde es usted? So you might hear either one of those depending on the situation that you're in. And this is a very common question that you'll get asked, especially if you're in a place where it's clear that you're a non-native speaker of Spanish and people might just be curious as to where you're from. It's also something that commonly comes up if you're in a language exchange or you're having a conversation with someone for the first time. They're generally going to ask, where do you live? Which is ¿dónde vives? Or ¿dónde vive? If I'm using usted. Or where are you from? ¿De dónde eres? So those are the two things you might hear. Now, it's really important to know how to say the name of where you're from in Spanish. So you can say, for most of you, it would be soy de Estados Unidos, or maybe soy de Inglaterra if you live in England. But you want to make sure you know how to say your country in Spanish and also the city that you're in. Because, a lot of times this is an opportunity for you, especially if you're talking to someone in a language exchange or even a tutor or a teacher that's in a Spanish-speaking country. They may not know a lot about where you live. So you want to think about that you want to be able to explain it in relationship to something that people actually know about. So, for example, if I say, soy de Estados Unidos, I'm from the United States, or I say, vivo en Estados Unidos, which I live in the United States, that's a very limited answer. You probably are going to want to add a little bit more detail. Now, I've learned from experience, if I just tell someone the name of the city that I'm from and they're not from the US, they generally look at me with a blank stare. And it's because there are several cities in the United States that are pretty famous. So you probably want to learn how to talk about where you live in relationship to one of those cities. So, for example, I might tell someone, vivo cerca de Nueva York. I live near New York. Now, do I really live very close to New York City? No. But at least if I say Nueva York, they'll go, oh, yeah, I know New York, because everyone knows New York, right? You can also say vivo en la costa este. Vivo en la costa este. So I live on the East Coast, or vivo en la costa oeste. Vivo en la costa oeste. I live on the West Coast. Or you can say vivo cerca de Los Angeles. Even if you live 6 hours from LA and you're in Northern California, right? Generally, no one's going to really know that. Now, if you want to get into the intricacies of explaining that, vivo en el norte de California, es como 6 horas de Los Angeles. That's very, very helpful because, again, you want to be able to describe where you live in relationship to something or somewhere that people understand. So keep that in mind and work on this, right? You want to think about how would you really explain this to someone who's not from where you're from and doesn't really know that much about the U.S. Now, obviously, if you're talking to someone in the U.S., you can just say the city that you're from or the state. But make sure you know how to say that in Spanish. Don't just revert to, yo vivo in Virginia, because you would say Virginia, right? So just, again, know the pronunciation and just kind of use the Spanish pronunciation rules for your city when in doubt. Like, for instance, for Chicago, you would probably say Chicago. Just try to, again, keep that. You don't have to, some people think that's a bit extra. But I just tend to like to keep my pronunciation flowing. So I won't say, yo vivo en New York. I'll say vivo en Nueva York. So, just kind of keep that in mind. So you want to be able to describe where you're from in relationship to something that people really understand. All right. So that's the first question you should definitely know how to answer. De donde eres o donde vives. And it's not de donde vives. So